congratulate us. This is not a victory. The victory will come when we get justice. Then we want to have a victory party. We're asking the federal government, which we've been asking them for a whole year, to come and take the Eric Garner's case. Because, as you know, at the grand jury, we didn't receive justice.
That Eric Garner's mother talking about the city's nearly $6 million settlement with the Garner family. As you know, Garner died almost exactly a year ago, that after getting taken down by an NYPD officer on Staten Island. And reflecting on Garner's death, Mayor de Blasio had this to say, quote, "I think the important thing is to stay focused on the work of reform. I think we've come a long way, even the last year, in terms of bringing police and community together." All right, Dominic, the last 12 months, what hasn't changed, and the settlement, we were talking yesterday, there was a $5 million offer on the table. Apparently the Garner family attorney suggested they take it, they declined it. A little bit less than $1 million more, they accepted it. Either order you want, from the settlement to the last 12 months, what has or hasn't changed?
As far as the NYPD, I think the mayor is correct in terms of, and here's how I define that the mayor is correct. The things were, if we look back a flashpoint to a year ago with those protests, things were so bad. I didn't know how this was going to end in terms of the way the community was out there each and every day, not just New York, but in cities all across the country. And it just seems like, for whatever reason, be it the mayor or the mayor's community affairs unit in the police department, whatever the case may be, it seems like there's been a meeting of the minds between the NYPD and the community. And things are never going to be 1,000% great, but people are able to function. Stop and frisk are dramatically down. It just seems like people are able to function.
But one thing to point out is, as that pendulum swung to a little bit more of a community-police relationship and a softer approach, so to speak, the other pendulum swung the other way. Crime is up, murder is up in the city, and we're on a path to have more and more homeless, panhandlers. All the stuff that we drove out of the city over the last number of years are starting to creep back into the system.
But to that end, from Bratton himself, there's been kind of a mixed bag of messaging. He wants more cops, but he acknowledges the city is just about as safe as it's ever been historically. I mean, we're still at near record lows. Yes, there's been more than maybe there was 6 months ago, but still comparative, it's one of, if not the safest big cities in America. It's not like we're going back to the late 70s or 80s.
But we were going in a direction of where crime was being reduced year over year over year over year. Our statistics were going down. Now they're starting to go up. I don't know how you paint.
But just saying,
I don't know how you.
June was less violence than even May.
Yeah, but
so you got to be careful to
year,
try and find a small
year
sample of
over year. That's clear. The murders are up. It's the first time in many years that murders have been up year over year. And there's no way to put a happy face on that. There just isn't.
I think a lot of people in the city have decided that the cost of that continually year after year after year decrease in even street level crimes like you were talking about isn't worth what we saw in this case, or what we saw in the Gurley case, or what we've seen in other cases that have popped up. And as for the increase in crime, it is there, but it's really a statistical thing. It's enough for the critics to have their say at it, but I think most people in the city don't feel like the city is any less safe than it was a year ago or a year and a half ago. It's the difference between the paper stats and the way people actually feel.
I want to get, before I turn Dom back to the settlement question. What's interesting this time around is it's not just the settlement and the quiet. They're pushing for something else out of this, the Garner family. And I know you've interviewed both the mother and members of the family on numerous occasions. Is this just a press conference, or does this go anywhere?
It's always been my contention that out of Michael Brown case in Missouri, Eric Garner, and I think there's been one or two others, I've always felt that the only one that had an opportunity of the feds taking on, because we all know at this table the threshold is much more difficult for a prosecutor, and you have a prosecutor at the table. But I always thought that the Garner case, because of the video, because lawyers can debate all day whether or not that was a chokehold, but I always thought that was the one case that the feds would take on. And if you notice, they're still taking time. It's been reported that a tough, hard-nosed prosecutor has been assigned to the federal case that they're looking into. my hunch is that out of all of these cases that have happened, that's the case, the Garner case, that the feds are going to take on. And for Officer Pantaleo, that will mean a nightmare because him and his attorney is going to have to defend himself in federal court.
You think there's a chance? I mean, I'm reading between the lines here, talking about many different government agencies, but I thought the move to put Schneiderman and to give him a prosecutor basically to just investigate cop-related shootings, that was an attempt to try and move forward on this rather than look back. You think the feds might take this up?
All right, I think I'm not. The issues are separate in my mind, but will the feds? I agree with Dominic on this one entirely. Is that the feds? I think they'll take this one.
You do?
Yeah, I think they'll take this. But onto the Schneiderman thing. That's a whole other thing. Having the Attorney General getting himself involved in, I guess, usurping the power of the local DAs.
Yeah.
As a local DA. The DA's offices were well equipped to handle these. They handled, they unfortunately have to handle a lot of these cases.
But you know what, Brad, the perception, and you've been in a DA's office before, but the perception from the public is if something happens on Staten Island versus something that happens on Brooklyn, it's going to be handled completely different depending on the politics of the DA and the politics of the community that he or she represents. Now, whether that's fair, not fair, whatever, that's the perception.
But what you're doing by giving it to the Attorney General and having him or her place it into a member of the Schneiderman staff putting it into the grand jury, your suggestion is saying that there's
too
some
much
kind of
political pressures involved for a DA to handle.
Yeah, an improper presentation by the local DA, and I don't think anybody could give in to that. Otherwise, all justice statewide would be in question.
But I'm just speaking from the community point of view right now. 9.5 out of 10 times we feel that the case has been thrown, that the DA is never going to actively look for an indictment. So it has to go to someone else.
I can just tell you from being on the inside of one DA's office that I never witnessed anything but fairness and justice.
Let me get to
the extent
a couple of things before I run out of time in New York. Governor Cuomo, he gave an emotional, he got emotional, I should say, at a Democratic fundraiser last night, speaking about his late father, Mario, and he also told the crowd he's still trying to come to grips with it, having this to say.
As a governor, David Patterson and I used to talk about this. You can get lonely as governor. It's hard to talk to people as a governor.
Andrew, I found this about him. He is the most removed, sometimes distant guy in politics you ever meet. But sometimes you start at the eulogy for his father and you see it. He becomes intensely personal. And talk about the complicated relationship. The more you heard about the context of it, he said in the last year his father was telling him the things he wished different. He did different in government, what he should do as governor and everything else. And him talking that he's lonely and he has no one to talk to. And that poor David Patterson, he'd bring him up, when he brought him on there after a while. I always thought Patterson must have been like, hey, you forget what you did to me? Where were you, pal, for me? But anyway, I think you had to sit there and listen. He's a complicated figure.
The cynic in me wants to say that he just runs ultra hot or ultra cold, depending on whatever mind frame he's in. He's either completely reserved and doesn't give you anything, or he gives you more than you would expect that you would get in that one moment. I'll reserve a little judgment. I mean, my father's still with me, so I haven't had to go through that, but I can imagine that would absolutely change your worldview and change the way that you look at things. So maybe he's a guy who's in the middle of transition. Keep in mind he's had personal issues with his girlfriend. So there may be changes going on inside Andrew Cuomo. You don't seem like you believe it.
It can't get lonely up there, though.
Well, wait a minute.
I don't want to be cynical all the time.
Wait. Why do I feel like I'm being fished into this topic? I'm being pulled in. You said,
were looking at me.
No. I'm just looking at because you said perhaps you were being a little cynical, and perhaps I'll be an entire whole lot more cynical because I don't buy it at all. Having known those tears or those emotions was the fact that Preet Bharara is on his backside and his poll numbers and his poll numbers that are not looking good. His battle with De Blasio.
I'm calling a lot of things, but I'm studying compared to you.
If I was his advisor, I would say, Governor, show a little emotion, please.
I would love to say somebody telling him that and Cuomo telling him where they wouldn't go. He does not take instructions.
He's also,
you buy any of it?
Listen, I think that the
you.
governor is going through very difficult times. I agree
Right.
with Andrew.
Right.
If there's a time for emotion for any human being with what he's been facing in the
And I should
last
mention
number
that,
of months.
that comments came after an 8-minute video remembering his late father. That's in the context that it was delivered.
And there's
But
no
yeah.
question about his relationship with his father was very close. Obviously, it was complicated and fluid, but at the same time, it just seemed like the two of them, needed to feed off each other to survive, and now that one part is gone.
His father beloved in memory, and he's underwater in his approval ratings. That'll get you thinking too. I mean,
Well, we come back, we'll stay in New York, and no matter how hard we try, you can't get away from the Donald. He has apparently insulted the wrong guy. You cannot make this story up. You really can't here. He's picking a fight with the fugitive Mexican drug lord El Chapo, and apparently El Chapo is taking notice.